Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. What you're about to hear is one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in American history, the story of Molly Bish, a 16-year-old lifeguard whose summer job turned into a mystery that still chills Massachusetts decades later. A peaceful lake, a warm June morning, and a girl full of dreams, gone before anyone even realized she was missing. This is not just about what happened that day, but about the silence that followed for 23 long summers. June 27th, 2000, the first truly hot day of summer in Warren, Massachusetts. The air shimmered over the blue surface of Cummins Pond, a quiet swimming area surrounded by forest and gravel roads. Families were planning picnics, children were waking up for swimming lessons, and 16-year-old Molly Bish, cheerful and determined, was getting ready for her summer shift as a lifeguard. That morning, her mother, Molly Bish, drove her to work, just as she had done every day since Molly started. Maggie remembered her daughter wearing her blue bathing suit, carrying a whistle and a small first aid kit. Her pride in that job was something that made the whole family smile. They arrived at the parking area around 10 a.m. The pond was calm, almost deserted. Maggie noticed a white sedan parked near the entrance. Inside sat a man smoking a cigarette, watching the area quietly. His presence made her uneasy, but she brushed it off. It was, after all, a public park. Molly waved goodbye, walked toward the lifeguard stand, and disappeared into the routine of her day. Her mother's car drove away, tires crunching on the gravel. An hour later, at around 11 a.m., families began arriving at the lake. Towels, coolers, children running to the water, but something felt wrong. The lifeguard chair was empty. Molly's flip-flops, whistle, water bottle and first aid kit were neatly placed beside it. No sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away. No one had seen her leave. By noon, the first emergency calls were made. The Warren Police Department arrived, assuming at first that Molly had wandered off, maybe to use the restroom, maybe to meet a friend. But as the minutes turned into hours, that explanation began to crumble. Officers combed the surrounding woods. Helicopters circled overhead. Divers searched the shallow parts of the pond. Nothing. It was as if Molly had simply vanished into the morning air. When her mother returned to the site, she immediately felt the dread in her chest. Her daughter's chair, the one she had proudly claimed as her summer post, stood empty against the bright blue sky, and in that silence, Maggie realized something terrible. Molly was gone, and the man in the white sedan might have been the last person to ever see her alive. By early afternoon on June 27, 2000, word spread quickly through the small town of Warren, Massachusetts. The lifeguard was missing. Parents gathered their children from the water. Park attendants called local police again, their voices shaking. What began as confusion quickly turned into panic. Officers from the Warren Police Department, joined by Massachusetts State Police and volunteers, converged on Cummins Pond. The first responders found what Molly Bish had already seen, an eerie stillness. Molly's belongings sat undisturbed. Her chair looked untouched. There were no drag marks, no footprints leading into the woods or water. The working theory changed by the hour. At first, they wondered if she'd wandered off for a break or gone to meet someone, but by 2 p.m., with no sign of her anywhere, police launched a full-scale search and rescue operation. Helicopters circled above, combing the dense green canopy of the Massachusetts forest. Police divers entered the pond, sweeping every inch of the water. Volunteer firefighters walked shoulder to shoulder through the underbrush, calling her name into the trees. The sound of radios and dogs barking echoed across the woods. By evening, over 100 people were involved in the search. But as night fell, dread began to take hold. Detectives found Molly's towel folded neatly on the sand, her whistle hanging from the chair. Whoever took her, if someone had, did it without leaving a trace. At 10 p.m., Chief Norman Dand, fictionally condensed real, wait, let's continue properly. At 10 p.m., Chief Alan Skoog of the Warren Police held a brief press conference at the scene. We're treating this as a missing person case. We have no indication of foul play at this time, but we're exploring all possibilities. But behind closed doors, officers already feared the worst. The Bish family's home became a command center overnight. Maggie, her husband John Bish, and their older son John Jr. sat sleepless, answering questions, replaying every detail of that morning. Maggie couldn't stop thinking about the man in the white car, the one who watched as she dropped Molly off. He was smoking, she told detectives, just sitting there, looking. Police immediately issued an alert for any white sedan seen near Cummins Pond, urging the public to report suspicious individuals. Dozens of calls came in. Most led nowhere. Over the next week, the search grew massive. More than 500 volunteers joined. Local schools cancelled classes so students could help distribute flyers with Molly's smiling face and the words, "Missing, last seen June 27th, in bold letters. Television crews arrived. National networks picked up the story. A photo of Molly, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a bright smile, became the face of every newscast. But despite the scale of the search, no sign of Molly was ever found. No clothing, no struggle, no trace of where she went. The only certainty was the fear that settled over the town. The lake, once filled with laughter, was now surrounded by police tape and silence. And as investigators reviewed each witness statement, one detail kept returning: the white car and the man who had vanished just as completely as Molly had. While the woods and water were searched inch by inch, one question echoed through every briefing room. Who was the man in the white car? Maggie Bish couldn't get his face out of her mind. An older man, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, dark hair flecked with grey, sitting behind the wheel of a white sedan near Cummins Pond. She remembered the way he watched, not curious, but intent. She'd told police about him on the very first day, but at the time they hadn't considered it crucial. Now it was the only solid lead they had. Composite sketches were made and circulated statewide. They showed a heavy-set man with deep-set eyes and a cigarette in hand. Flyers went up across Massachusetts, urging anyone who recognized him to call the tip line. Within 48 hours, hundreds of calls came in. Most were false alarms. Some described similar vehicles, others described strange men seen near playgrounds or beaches, but one call caught investigators' attention. A local woman reported that she had also seen a white sedan near Cummins Pond the day before Molly vanished. She'd taken her young daughter swimming that morning and noticed the car parked near the woods, the driver watching the water. When she looked again, he turned his face away. "It gave me a bad feeling," she said, "like he wasn't there to swim." This revelation changed everything. It suggested Molly had been watched, possibly for days, maybe weeks before the abduction. Detectives now treated the case as a targeted kidnapping. The FBI joined the investigation, profiling the unknown suspect as a man familiar with the area, likely a local, with a background in construction or maintenance, someone comfortable outdoors, someone who could move unnoticed through the woods. Several potential suspects emerged, but none matched perfectly. One man, a known sex offender named Rodney Stanger, drew special attention. He had lived in Southbridge, Massachusetts, not far from Warren, and drove a white Pontiac similar to the one witnesses described. He'd moved to Florida in 2001, right after Molly's disappearance. Years later, he would be convicted of murdering his girlfriend. When investigators revisited Stanger's past, they discovered eerie coincidences. He hunted and fished in the area near Cummins Pond. He matched the physical description, and when shown the composite sketch, even Maggie Bish herself whispered, "That's him." But despite the mounting suspicion, no physical evidence tied Stanger to Molly's abduction. His DNA didn't match the samples recovered from the scene, and by the time he became a person of interest, years had already passed. Crucial evidence long lost to time. The white car, the one image burned into Maggie's memory, became a ghost in the investigation. It appeared in reports, in press conferences, in the nightmares of a family that refused to stop searching. It was the car that started it all. and the man who drove it seemed to have vanished as completely as Molly Bish herself. By July 2000, Warren, Massachusetts, no longer felt like the quiet New England town it once was. Police checkpoints surrounded Cummins Pond. Reporters filled the roads, and somewhere in the chaos, the Bish family tried to survive each day without their daughter. Every morning, Maggie and John Bish woke up to the same thought. Maybe today would be the day they found her. They joined search teams, handed out flyers, and spoke to news crews until their voices cracked. Their kitchen table became a command center, stacked with maps, newspaper clippings, and phone logs. Hundreds of volunteers still came out daily, some from neighboring states. Firefighters, hunters, and hikers combed the forests with metal detectors and dogs. Helicopters from the Massachusetts State Police hovered low, their shadows sweeping across the treetops like ghosts. But nothing changed. The days grew hotter, the woods grew quieter, and hope began to thin like the mist over the lake. By late July, the case had become national news. America's Most Wanted featured Molly's story, and tips poured in from across the country. Sightings in New York, Vermont, even as far as Florida. Every one of them turned out to be false. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit built a profile of the possible suspect. They believed the abductor was a white male in his 30s, 50s, familiar with the area, likely someone who blended easily into the community. He might have watched Molly before striking, possibly for several days, maybe even interacting with her. Despite the intense coverage, the investigation hit a wall. There were no fingerprints, no vehicle leads, and no ransom note. The only physical clues, her sandals, whistle, and towel, yielded nothing. The scene had been too public, too disturbed by searchers to preserve clean evidence. At home, Maggie refused to let despair take root. She began keeping a journal, writing letters to her daughter. "We're still looking, Molly, every day. I can still feel you near the lake. I promise, we won't stop." The Bish family turned their grief into action. They organized rallies, spoke at community events, and pushed for better statewide protocols for missing children. Their efforts would later inspire Massachusetts's first comprehensive child abduction response plan, often referred to as Molly's Law. Still, for the family, the silence of that first summer was unbearable. The pond that had once shimmered with laughter now felt cursed. Children no longer swam there. The lifeguard stand was removed and replaced with flowers. And though the search officially continued into autumn, by September, investigators privately admitted what the Bish family already feared. They were no longer looking for a missing girl. They were searching for her remains. The long summer of 2000 ended without answers, but the question that haunted everyone remained. Where was Molly Bish? The leaves turned, snow came, and the search for Molly Bish faded from the front pages. But for her family, time stood still. The Bish home became a shrine to the missing 16-year-old. Photographs of Molly in her blue lifeguard swimsuit, her medals from the swim team, her smile frozen in summer. Maggie and John Bish never moved her belongings. Her room remained exactly as it was on June 27, 2000. Bed unmade, posters on the walls, her journal still open on the desk. For investigators, the case went cold, but never closed. Detective Mike O'Keefe from the Massachusetts State Police Major Crimes Unit was one of many who refused to give up. Every few months, he'd reopen a file, re-interview a witness, or recheck a piece of evidence with new forensic methods. But for years, the boxes of files yielded nothing new. Meanwhile, the Bish family began receiving letters. Some were kind, prayers from strangers, sympathy from other families of missing children. Others were cruel. A few claimed to know where Molly was. Some offered false confessions, others demanded money. Police tracked every lead. None were real. In 2002, a glimmer of hope appeared. Divers searching a remote pond a few miles from Warren found a piece of fabric tangled in weeds, a color similar to Molly's swimsuit. Forensic testing, however, ruled it out. The years rolled on. The Bish family learned to live in the shadow of uncertainty. Maggie became a quiet but relentless activist, speaking publicly about the failures in missing persons protocols. "If it can happen here," she told a crowd at the Massachusetts State House, "it can happen anywhere." Her husband, John, grew quieter. He struggled with guilt that he hadn't driven Molly to work that morning, that he'd let her go alone. Friends say he would often walk near Comins Pond at dusk, staring across the water, as if waiting for her to appear. By 2003, investigators had interviewed over 1,000 people. They checked sex offenders in the area, questioned hunters, construction workers, and drifters. They even followed psychic tips and strange dreams reported by locals. Nothing. Yet, despite the silence, the Bish family refused to let the case fade. Every June 27th, they held a candlelight vigil at the pond. Families gathered with photos, music, and prayers. The light of hundreds of candles reflected off the dark water, each flame a promise that Molly's story wouldn't be forgotten. The case had become more than a tragedy. It was now part of Massachusetts history, a wound that time refused to close. And then, 3 years after she vanished, a hunter walking deep in the woods near Whiskey Hill, Palmer, stumbled upon something that would shatter the stillness of those lost years. He thought it was animal bones. It wasn't. It was June 9th, 2003, almost 3 years to the day since Molly Bish vanished. The morning was warm and clear when a hunter named Tim McGuigan hiked into a remote wooded area in Palmer, Massachusetts, not far from a spot locals called Whiskey Hill. The forest was dense, overgrown, and silent, a place few people visited unless they knew it well. As he walked deeper into the woods, McGuigan noticed something pale among the leaves. At first, he thought it was animal remains, a deer, maybe. But when he got closer, the shape didn't fit. It was small, fragile, and then he saw the curve of a human skull. McGuigan froze. He knew instantly who it might be. He'd grown up in Warren. He remembered the flyers, the vigils, the missing lifeguard. He backed away, trembling, and called the police. Within hours, the site was swarming with investigators from the Massachusetts State Police, the FBI, and local detectives who had been haunted by the Bish case for years. Yellow tape went up across the trees. Forensic experts worked methodically, sifting through leaves and soil, documenting every inch. They recovered bones, clothing fragments, and a small piece of jewelry. Everything pointed to one terrible conclusion. Within days, dental records confirmed what everyone already feared. The remains belonged to Molly Ann Bish, age 16. When the news reached the Bish family, Maggie and John collapsed in each other's arms. Their daughter, gone for 3 years, had finally been found, but not the way they prayed for. "At least we can bring her home," Maggie said softly at a press conference, tears streaking her face. "At least she's not alone anymore." For investigators, the discovery reignited the case, but what they found in the woods only deepened the mystery. The site was nearly 5 miles from Comins Pond, too far for Molly to have wandered alone. The terrain was rugged, covered in steep hills and thick underbrush. Whoever brought her there knew the area well. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Evidence teams searched the area for weeks. They collected soil samples, fibers, and even bullet casings from nearby hunting zones. Yet nothing definitively tied any suspect to the scene. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no signs of struggle. The condition of the remains suggested she had died around the time she disappeared, likely within hours of being taken. But how, when, and by whom remained unanswered. At Molly's funeral that July, more than 1,000 people filled the church in Warren. Her coffin was white, decorated with photos, flowers, and a whistle, the same kind she used as a lifeguard. The search was over, but the investigation and the fight for justice was just beginning. With Molly Bish's remains finally recovered, investigators faced the question that had haunted them for 3 years: who killed her? The woods near Whiskey Hill became the center of a massive forensic operation. Dozens of detectives combed through the surrounding terrain, collecting evidence, mapping possible entry and exit routes, and reconstructing the likely path her abductor had taken. Yet every clue seemed to lead into darkness. Early theories focused on known sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. The list included over 100 individuals, many with prior arrests for assaults in wooded or recreational areas. But one name kept resurfacing: Rodney Stanger. Stanger had lived in Southbridge, Massachusetts, less than 30 miles from Comins Pond, at the time of Molly's disappearance. He drove a white Pontiac, eerily similar to the car seen by Maggie Bish that morning. After Molly vanished, Stanger abruptly moved to Florida, where he reinvented himself under a new identity. Years later, in 2008, he was arrested for murdering his girlfriend, Crystal Morrison, in a case disturbingly similar to Molly's. Isolated area, sudden disappearance, and signs of long-term predation. When investigators revisited his past, they found that Stanger had hunted and fished in the same region where Molly's remains were found. Detectives confronted him in a Florida prison. He refused to cooperate, claiming he didn't even know who that girl was. Yet when shown a composite sketch based on Maggie's description, Stanger reportedly smirked and said nothing. For many, that silence spoke volumes. But once again, science failed, where instinct screamed truth. DNA recovered from the scene was too degraded to confirm a match. No physical evidence tied Stanger directly to Molly's murder. All that remained were coincidences, and chilling ones at that. Another person of interest emerged in 2011. Gerald Battistoni, a convicted rapist who bore an uncanny resemblance to the composite sketch. Battistoni had been an informant for the Massachusetts State Police in the late 1990s and was known for violent behavior. He attempted suicide shortly after being publicly linked to the Bish case. He later died in prison, never charged, never cleared. Over the years, rumors and theories multiplied. Some believed Molly was targeted by someone who had been watching her at the pond, perhaps a regular visitor, perhaps a stranger who had driven through once and noticed her. Others speculated that she may have been followed from home. For the Bish family, each new suspect brought a flicker of hope and another heartbreak. Every time they say they have someone, Maggie told reporters in 2012, I feel like I can finally breathe again, and then it slips away. Every single time. The investigation officially remains unsolved, but detectives still describe the case as active. Files continue to be re-examined with new forensic methods: touch DNA, digital mapping, and modern behavioral analysis. Yet, decades later, the question remains suspended over Warren, like the fog on Comins Pond. Who took Molly Bish? And why? For Maggie and John Bish, grief never turned into silence, it turned into movement. After Molly's remains were found in 2003, the family vowed that her story would not fade into another cold case file. They believed her disappearance had exposed serious flaws in the system: a lack of coordination between police agencies, delayed alerts, and slow mobilization during the first critical hours after a child goes missing. From their small home in Warren, Massachusetts, they began a campaign that would reshape state law. Maggie, a former schoolteacher, became the voice of reform. She spoke at schools, community centers, and press conferences, repeating the same message. If Molly had been taken more seriously from the start, if the right alerts had gone out, maybe we'd be telling a different story. Her persistence reached the State House in Boston. In 2004, Massachusetts introduced a comprehensive child abduction response plan, known unofficially as Molly's Law. The initiative called for immediate interagency communication, specialized training for officers, and faster dissemination of missing child alerts. The Bish family didn't stop there. They created the Molly Bish Foundation, dedicated to improving public safety and supporting families of missing children. Maggie personally reached out to parents across the U.S. who had lost children to abduction or violence, including the families of Elizabeth Smart and Amber Hagerman, whose name inspired the Amber Alert system. John Bish, meanwhile, struggled privately. He had always been the quiet strength of the family, a man who spent long hours maintaining his property, visiting the pond, and walking the same trails where his daughter once worked. Friends recalled seeing him sitting near the water at sunset, whispering her name as if she might answer. In interviews, he often said, "You can't move on, you can only move forward." Tragedy struck again in 2018 when John Bish passed away after a long illness, never seeing his daughter's case solved. At his funeral, Maggie stood before a packed church and promised to continue their mission. "He believed Molly would get justice," she said, "and I still do." Over the years, the Bish family transformed their heartbreak into hope for others. They organized annual remembrance events, funded search and rescue programs, and helped pass legislation, improving DNA databases and offender tracking. But every June 27th, the date Molly disappeared, remains sacred. The community gathers by Cummins Pond, candles in hand, as Maggie leads the same vigil she began 2 decades ago. The night air fills with soft prayers and the reflection of hundreds of flickering flames. Each candle is a promise that even in darkness they will keep searching for truth, because for the Bish family, justice isn't just a hope, it's a mission that outlives time. Decades after that quiet morning in June 2000, Molly Bish's disappearance still echoes through Massachusetts, a haunting reminder that even small towns hold deep shadows. Every few years, her name returns to the headlines, a new lead, a new suspect, a new hope. Each one reignites the public's memory and the Bish family's pain. In 2011, renewed testing on evidence from the site near Whiskey Hill offered a glimmer of possibility. Forensic scientists hoped that advances in touch DNA, a method that can extract genetic material from the smallest skin cells, might finally reveal who had been with Molly in those woods. The results, however, came back inconclusive. The years that followed brought more theories than answers. Some former investigators suggested that Molly's abduction may have been opportunistic, a predator who saw her alone and struck within minutes. Others believed it was premeditated, possibly connected to someone who had seen her at the pond before. Yet no theory fully fit. For the community of Warren, the case became part of their identity. Locals grew up with her photo on posters, her name whispered in classrooms and church pews. Teenagers who hadn't even been born when she vanished still knew the story. Maggie Bish, now in her 70s, continues to appear at press conferences, her voice softer but still steady. "I believe someone out there knows something," she says each time. "It's never too late to do the right thing." Her words have inspired a generation of advocates and investigators who now treat missing persons cases with greater urgency. Many credit the Bish family's persistence for reshaping how law enforcement handles child disappearances nationwide. But even with all the awareness, the case remains unsolved, and that silence is deafening. Detectives occasionally revisit the Rodney Stanger lead, especially after new digital mapping tools showed that his hunting routes overlapped with Molly's disappearance site. Still, with no physical link, the case teeters between evidence and intuition. Meanwhile, the place where it all began, Cummins Pond, has changed. The lifeguard chair is gone, replaced by a small plaque engraved with Molly's name. The laughter of swimmers has returned, but under it lingers a quiet reverence, as if the water remembers. Visitors still leave flowers and handwritten notes there. Some bring white roses, others bring whistles, symbols of the job she loved and the innocence she lost. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the same words appear in news headlines. Still no answers. But maybe the truest legacy of Molly Bish isn't in what's unknown. It's in what her story changed. A mother's courage, a state's reform, a nation's awareness that every missing child deserves the full weight of hope, not the hesitation of bureaucracy. The echoes of the case still move through time, not as whispers of tragedy, but as reminders of resilience. 23 summers have come and gone since Molly Bish disappeared from her lifeguard post at Commons Pond. The world has changed. Technology, forensics, even how police handle missing person cases. Yet the empty space Molly left behind remains the same. For her mother, Maggie Bish, time hasn't healed the wound. It simply made her mission sharper. She still meets with investigators, attends memorials, and speaks at schools about safety and vigilance. She has become a quiet force of perseverance, a symbol for every parent who's ever waited for answers that never came. The Bish family's work has saved lives. Because of their advocacy, child alert systems in Massachusetts became faster, more coordinated, and more responsive. Today, when a child vanishes, alerts reach phones, radios, and patrol cars within minutes, something that didn't happen for Molly in 2000. Her legacy lives in those saved minutes, in the speed of a response, the call of a dispatcher, the awareness of a community. But justice remains elusive. The case is still open, classified by the Massachusetts State Police as an active homicide investigation. Detectives continue to test fragments of evidence using new technologies, from digital footprint analysis to environmental DNA scanning. Each test carries the same fragile hope that after all this time, one trace, one match, one truth might finally surface. In the years since her death, Molly has become something larger than a case file. She's become a face of endurance. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative series revisit her story again and again, not to sensationalize it, but because it represents the universal pain of the unanswered. At every anniversary vigil, the community of Warren gathers by the water. Children who never knew her now light candles beside their parents. The air hums with quiet reverence as the sun dips behind the trees, and Maggie speaks the same words she's said every year since 2000. "We love you, Molly. We're still looking. We'll never stop." The reflection of the candles on the pond looks like stars scattered across the surface, small, fragile lights that refuse to go out. Maybe that's what Molly's story truly is. Not just about a tragedy, but about the fight to keep light alive, even in the darkest places. And as long as her name is spoken, as long as her story is told, Molly Bish will never truly be lost. If this story touched you, share it, because awareness keeps cases like Molly Bish's alive. Every view, every share, every whispered conversation can reach someone who knows something. Justice might still be out there, waiting for the right voice to speak up. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth behind disappearances and the people who refuse to forget. Let's keep her name alive, not just in mystery, but in meaning. Justice for Molly Bish, true crime, unsolved mystery, a cold case, documentary, So Hope Lives Here.